This is Dan Sullivan with Burn Pits 360, and this is a re-recording of a speech that I gave at Operation Stand Together on May 20th, 2017. It all began with burning trash. Immense pits of burning trash, great dark plumes, arising from the pits at military bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. These pits, they were meant to be temporary, but the effect of the plumes lingered, not in the sky, but in the bodies of the veterans who breathed in the dark toxins, heavy metals, poisons, chemicals, and dioxins, much like the Agent Orange that afflicted our Vietnam veterans in the past. But at Burn Pits 360, we seek not to repeat the mistakes of the past. We seek to remember the forgotten wounded and remember them now. We seek to change the course of history, that cycle of delay, deny, wait till they die, of which we've heard so much today. And to do this, to do so, requires vigilance. Dark clouds of economic uncertainty and devastating illness hang over the families of those affected. Our medical and benefit systems, they are ill-equipped to deal with environmental and injury. And so the layperson, the families of the wounded, take on this vigilance. They take on this vigilance as a sacred duty. Leroy Torres was a Texas state trooper. He was a captain in the the Army Reserves, who breathed in these darkened plumes. And when he returned from battle, he had lost the power of breath. His life, it was once to serve and protect. It was now a struggle for oxygen. Leroy has something called deployment-related lung disease. Everyone agrees that there is such a thing on the VA side, the DoD side, and the private side. Deployment-related lung disease. You just don't hear very much about it. It's a disabling constriction of the small airways. Sometimes it's called constrictive bronchiolitis, sometimes it's called other things. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is another one of its manifestations. It was from, though, Leroy's struggle that the organization we call Burn Pits 360 was born. In 1993, our keynote speaker for today's event, Erin Brockovich, she noticed a trend of illness in a community, Hinckley, California. And what she did is she went door to door and she documented the cancers caused by a company's use of a carcinogenic substance known as hexavalent chromium. She documented it. She worked persistently. And through the process of documentation and the connection of the cancers to hexavalent chromium, through her hard work and her diligence and the help of some lawyers, the people affected by this exposure received justice. They were made whole, or as whole as you can be made when affected by such a thing. Similarly, Leroy and his wife, Rosie, noticed a trend on social media of illness among veterans that was caused by burn pits. And nearly an entire decade ago, they established an independent environmental health registry for burn pit exposure, and thus began the long quest of advocacy based on science, of logging the injuries, illnesses, and deaths associated with burn pits, of doing this online with no budget. Today, Burn Pits 360 is the only 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization in the nation operating a private, independent burn pit registry and advocating on behalf of veterans wounded by burn pit exposures. That is what we are, and here is what we know. Here is what we all know. The environmental health hazards of the burn pits are recorded in scientific journals, government reports, even in leaflets produced by the Department of Veterans Affairs, sometimes even by the Department of Defense, in private and public memoranda. These burn pit plumes, as measured by scientists, by technicians, by those with the expertise to take the measurements, these burn pit plumes contained chemicals that are associated with immune dysfunction, IQ deficit, reproductive abnormalities, cancer, liver and kidney disease, leukemia, lung disease, and more. Anyone exposed to these chemicals at certain level is at risk. Dioxin is one of the chemicals, the same chemical associated with Agent Orange from the Vietnam era. And dioxin is basically a carcinogenic for any part of the body. It wreaks havoc with the system. This is just one of the many chemicals that was emitting from these dark plumes of smoke on a daily basis. Right now, there are over 6,000 entries in the Burn Pits 360 registry, including 100 deaths. Dr. Anthony Zemma, who's a physician in New York, has been studying the Burn Pits 360 data along with data from a similar registry, which is now being operated by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And from the two registries, he developed recommendations for clinical evaluation and care for those who are exposed to burn pits. He plans to continue to study the Burn Pits 360 registry as long as he has funding and Burn Pits 360 has funding. As the Burn Pits 360 data captures as the Burn Pits 360 registry captures data, illness, and death that the VA registry does not capture. And let me just pause here for a moment and tell you how important funding is to this endeavor. Rosie Torres and Leroy Torres and Anthony Zemma and the people working on this have been working on shoestring budgets. They've been working because they're committed to working on it. But at a certain point, every person has their limit and they run out of steam. This is a business. What we're doing is work. It is work in the public interest. And we must seek and receive funding in order to see this through to the end. And any donation to Burn Pits 360, now that it's a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, is tax deductible to the full extent of the law. I didn't actually say that part today at Operation Gratitude. That's just special for this recording for you. We know more about what we know. We know that the VA says it offers a special clinical evaluation for exposures to burn pits and airborne hazards. We know it says that, but we also know through a covert investigation that VA's environmental health coordinators and physicians deny knowledge of this burn pit evaluation, or in some cases, they openly admit that they're supposed to do the clinical evaluation for exposure to burn pits and airborne hazards, but they refuse to do it. And we have documented every instance of this, and there will be a report released on our investigation. Why are we going to release a report? Because to us the facts are important and what we know is important. And what we know is that there are toxic injuries. We know that there are productive ways to address these toxic injuries. We know that these productive ways are not being implemented, and for no reason at all. And we know it's time for that to change. That's why Burn Pits 360 is so very proud of our new relationship with Amnesty International USA, an organization that fights for human rights, and it sees this issue, the issue of burn pits, as a global human rights issue, and that's how I see it too. This is a global human rights issue. And it's time for us to make sure that people's rights are protected. This May, Burn Pits 360 and Amnesty International USA, we released a joint statement calling for members of Congress to do 4 things. I'm going to tell you what those 4 things are. Number 1, publicly go on the record drawing attention to the dangers that burn pits and toxic exposures pose to veterans. They just simply have to say that a toxic exposure is toxic, that it does in fact pose a risk to veterans. Number 2, urge the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Committees to hold public hearings to further investigate any ongoing use of burn pits and to hear testimony from impacted veterans. Yes, you heard that right. There are still burn pits, even though we know that burn pits cause health risks. And it's time for us to listen to and to hear the words of those who have been impacted by the inhalation of these exposures. Number 3, support legislative efforts to ensure that affected veterans receive health care for their devastating conditions, and that surviving families of the deceased veterans receive benefits. It's pretty simple. Number 4, ensure assistance and compensation are available to service members suffering health effects following exposure to open-air burn pits, including, where appropriate, a service connection presumption. We gotta do this. We gotta do this to make sure that the people who served our nation in war, whether or not we agreed that the war was a good idea or a bad idea, they served the nation in war. If their injuries were as likely as not caused by an exposure in that war, we are legally obligated, ethically obligated, and morally obligated as a grateful nation to provide health care and benefits. That's the law. And it's time to make things easier for the sick. So this year, another exciting thing, not only did we issue this brief, but Amnesty International USA and Burn Pits 360 will host a congressional issue briefing open to the public on burn pits, the first one, and on these 4 calls to action. So what I want to say to the assembled group today of Operation Stand Together, the purpose of Operation Stand Together that Vince that has organized, was for us, all of us who have been impacted by the toxic exposures of military service, to come together in one place and to recognize and to realize that we have a shared cause. We're not fighting with each other over who should be reimbursed for what, or whether this was an injury or that was not. We have a shared goal, and that is for a toxic wound to be recognized as a toxic wound, whatever the toxic wound is. I happen to be focusing on the toxic exposures of burn pits, but there are many other exposures. We heard earlier from the atomic veterans who were exposed to radiation during cleanup after atomic bomb experiments. We must recognize these as consequences of military service, and we must take care of the people who did the work for us. So let's join together. Let's join together and let's ask for excellence. True excellence in occupational and environmental medicine, and not just in the military or the VA, but also in private practice. You know, the average doctor only gets 1 credit hour of environmental and occupational medicine. The average doctor doesn't know very much about this stuff, the stuff that we're talking about here. It's time for that to change. It's time to have a robust environmental and occupational medicine programs, and the DoD and the VA are uniquely positioned to further that objective because of their resources. And it's in the best interest of the nation to have a healthy armed forces that has loyalty and is treated with respect and dignity and honor. Because these injuries, these invisible injuries, are just as debilitating as the visible wounds of war. They're just not being recognized. They're just not being seen. Let us see them. Let us see that the smoke of the burn pit carries, that it's with us even now, invisible but lingering like an aftershock. So I'm here today because of Leroy Torres and Rosie Torres. I'm here because I'm the strategy and communications liaison for Burn Pits 360. I am here because Rosie Torres is the executive director of Burn Pits 360, and she asked me to be here. And I received some financial assistance to get here. But I'm also here for another reason. I am from one of the families who took up this cause of vigilance. My brother Tom got sick when he came back serving as a Marine in Iraq. He had trouble breathing. His body began to swell. He bled several times per day due to what they called indeterminate colitis. They couldn't figure out what it was, but I can tell you that he spent the last several days of his life, he spent a lot of it in the bathroom with the door shut, bleeding. His doctors told him he had somatoform disorder, suggested that he see a psychiatrist. They didn't mention anything about the chemicals that he was likely to have been exposed to in Iraq and the consequences of those exposures. So in 2009, on February 16th, I found Tom's body. He was dead. His lungs had given out. And I vowed at that moment, I made a singular vow to find out what happened to him, to dedicate myself to finding out what happened to him, because I wanted to know, because I felt I owed it to him as a brother. And I spent many years working at this. I am still working at it to this day. But now I understand. I looked through Tom's medical records, okay? I had never read medical records at that point before. I didn't know how to read them, so I had friends who were doctors teach me how to read medical records, and we cataloged the medical records, and I went through every one. There was one medical record that was called, that I can remember right now, that's important. It was called the Post-Deployment Health Questionnaire, and on it is where he could check boxes next to things he was exposed to while deployed, like dust or jet fuel. It's the Post-Deployment Health Questionnaire. Everybody gets one to fill out. List potential exposures. Presumably, doctors are supposed to use this medical record. It never came up while Tom was alive. There's one box that Tom checked that stands out to me today as I speak for Burn Pits 360. A box checked in my brother's handwriting next to the words, burning trash. Yes, Tom inhaled the dark plumes of burning trash as well. And Tom passed. And never did a doctor ever discuss with him the environmental health threats that he faced while he was in Iraq. They referred him to a psychiatrist. They said he had somatoform disorder. And then he died. So this all began, this speech, this moment in time, this event, truly. It all began with the fires of the burn pits. You know, as I was coming here to Washington, D.C., I met a fellow on the airplane I was flying into from Chicago. We struck up a conversation. He was a pharmaceutical executive, and I was interested in what he did. And I told him what I was doing. I was giving a speech about the burn pits. And he said, "Oh my goodness, the burn pits, I know exactly what they are." And I said, what are you talking about? He said, "The fires of Gehenna." He said, outside of Jerusalem, there was a large pit where they threw all the trash and they burned it. And they called it the fires of Gehenna. And that is what the metaphor of hell comes from. Hell is the fires of Gehenna, the original hell, the burn pit, consuming trash outside of the holy city. So it does begin with the burn pit. And the burn pit is a symbol. It's a symbol for us at Burn Pits 360 at the center of 360 degrees of other unaddressed exposures. A circle that includes each of us present today. At this event, Operation Stand Together. And as the circle widens, as we do in fact stand together, I am certain I must have faith and do have faith that justice in the end will prevail.